and honor women who served in the military and on the home front during World War II. That is the focus. I wanted to introduce the program chair of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, Linda Shevitz. Linda Lindsay and Jean Cooper have just done an incredible job in getting in touch with all of you and also in putting the program together. So we are just thrilled to have you here. You'll notice that one of the themes of the Heritage Center is adding her story to history to tell our story, because we know how women's history has been left out from way, way back all these years, and particularly this is one of the reasons we wanted to have this program and invited all of you here to honor you for your remarkable achievements and work. To know that Maryland women were involved in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812 in different ways, and the Civil War. People like Harriet Tubman became a spy for the Army, and Anna Ella Carroll was a military advisor to Abraham Lincoln. And Harriet Tubman, I just mentioned, was a spy also. So we've had a lot of women involved during wartime. But the real kind of breakthrough for Americans was World War II and Rosie the Riveters, who just changed the course of our history, what kinds of jobs we would go into, what kinds of work we would do. The value of women's untold stories is just unbelievable, and we're so glad we can capture some of them now. Coretta Scott King had said, "There is a spirit and a need and a person at the beginning of every great human advance. Every one of these must be right for that particular moment in history, or things never happen." So it's for all of you that we're honoring today and your families and the kind of support that we've had that is definitely adding her story to history to tell our story. And we're looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you. Thank you. And now we are lucky today to have some members of the Girl Scouts of the Central Maryland with us.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome all of the World War II veterans and women on the home front.
This is Elaine Harmon, and Elaine served in the WASP in World War II.
I'm just impressed with this program, although I can't hear a word anybody says. I'm confused. It's nice to know that the young generation still appreciates what everybody did, their part during World War II. I was stationed at Las Vegas at Nellis Air Force Base, and there my job was simply to take pilots up. I was the first pilot. I took the plane up and I landed it. And while we were up in the air, the pilot went under the hood and couldn't see where he was flying when he was practicing instrument flying, and I just had to make sure he didn't run into Charles Mountain or any other
Well, I'm Susan King, and last night I was told that I would represent our chapter of Rosie the Riveter. We are a chapter. We're not growing because we did one day we'll look around and we would have really shrunk. We looked all around in my travels with the Rosie the Riveter, the national chapter. We looked around for the scarcity, and we found out that I am the scarcity because we haven't been able to find any Afro-Americans who would admit to being as old maybe as I am. And this other lady that I didn't know couldn't remember when she worked, but she was 5 years older than I, so I know she must have worked at Martin because she wasn't an Eastern Air grad. So I don't know what else.
I'd like to introduce Betty Prince Sims. She goes by Princey, I understand. She served in the Marines.
This has been a busy week for me. Wednesday I went down to, I come from Silver Spring, I live in the Leisure World, and they had a big meeting of all World War veterans, World War II veterans. And so it was very interesting. There was a wife there from World War II who was 102 years old. She'd been in the post office in Europe. She was in a wheelchair, looked very well. And I sat there in my shirt, like this. I don't know what they told me to sit. And everybody kept passing out everything except giving me anything. And I thought, what am I, chopped liver? I was sitting by men, and I guess they thought I was a wife or something. And finally I said to one lady, would you please give me the material that you're handing out because I am a veteran? And she looked at me, and then she looked down at my shirt, and she said, oh, okay. Well, thank you. Okay, we have Edith Esslinger with us, who is an Army nurse for World War II.
Fortunate for me to be living my 93rd year
And meeting people like Linda Lindsay, and learning of the accomplishments of Maryland Women's Heritage Society. I was the result of my father's 5th attack for a boy. He died of a heart attack at 69 in March of 42, and I know he would have been approved of my joining the Army in August 1942. A nurse anesthetist and a nurse and a pharmacist. I hope I haven't been too long. And good luck to all.
We have Diane Sumner with us from the Waves.
1939, I was up in the French Alps climbing, late September, when Hitler went into Poland. And the first mobilization started in France. And because I was fluent in French and I was alone, I was 15, I got myself to Paris with what I had with me. And I managed to get Little Rob and get on a boat on the last. And it was the little President Roosevelt. It was a small American liner. And we zigzagged across the Atlantic for 2 weeks in a blackout. Because I went, because I could sit on a parachute and maybe jump out. This was a wonderful thought to me. They tested my big summer.
Daredevil then, weren't you?
Oh! I really wanted to jump out. Never happened. They repaired them too well. And I married a man on base from San Francisco. I stayed in California. I had 4 children. And that's the story of my life.
I would like to introduce Brigadier General Wilma L. Vaught is with us. I'd like to introduce Mary Cleve, who works with our Maryland Women's Heritage Center, who's featured on our display up here. Mary was a NASA astronaut. Are there any other women that are featured in the display up here, or women of Goddard that are with us today? Okay. Last but not least, our authors. There's 3 of them. Okay. I'd like to introduce Amy Nathan, who grew up in Baltimore and is an author, and she will give us an overview of the World War II military women and also her books. We'll give it a try.
Well, here, when I grew up in Baltimore, I gather it's only been around for 2 years, so that's why. And I'm so glad that you all are here today to honor these women who served during World War II. They truly proved that women can handle any challenge that's set before them. And they planted the seeds of change that would blossom for the rest of us in the women's movement in the 60s and 70s, totally changing the role that women play in this country. So I'm glad that we can say thank you. So I think we ought to just say a warm thank you to them first before we proceed any farther. Now I'm going to, as Jean said, I'm going to give a quick overview of how women served in the military, and then one of the other authors is going to talk about women who served on the home front. You can learn more about how women served in the military by looking at some of the books or what it was like when World War II started. Things were quite different then. For one thing, flying had only been around for less than 40 years. Most people at that time had never even been on an airplane. Things were quite different for women then. Most women did not have paying jobs. Can you see? You come around here and you can see the pictures, okay? Most women did not have paying jobs, and those that did were usually single, because at that time, if you all will remember, it wasn't thought proper for a married woman to have a job. In 1940, most women didn't even have a driver's license. So you better believe that the idea of women driving military jeeps, military supply trucks, military fighter planes was not considered women's work. And yet women did all of those things in World War II and more. Now, women had served in the First World War. 35,000 women served in the First World War. But they were restricted mainly to secretarial work and nursing. And when the war ended, the military closed down all of the women's branches except for the Army and Navy nurses, but they kept only a few hundred Army and Navy nurses on duty. But in 1939, when war started again in Europe, people realized that we probably were going to get involved in that war again. And some very far-sighted women tried to convince Congress and the military to start women's branches once again. But the military said, women on the right were code breakers based in New Guinea, trying to break the code on intercepted Japanese communications. Women also did secretarial work, but they did it in unusual places. These women did secretarial work at Army headquarters in North Africa and then again in Italy. These women ran the post office for the Army in the United Kingdom and then again in France. These were the first African American WACs who were allowed to serve overseas, and they were a groundbreaking group of women under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Carrie Adams Early. I think you're going to hear more about her a little bit later. The Waves, the Spars, and the Marines served mainly in the United States, but the WACs and the nurses served in the United States, but also wherever American forces were fighting. They were not supposed to be involved in combat, but often danger came to them. Now, these women on the top were in the rubble of London. In 1944, their WAC headquarters was hit by a bomb. The nurse on the right was based in Australia. And the Waves and the Marines, including our Marine over here, also served in aviation. But none of the women in the WACs or the Marines or the Waves who served in aviation were pilots. The pilots were all part of a separate group called the WASP, the Women Air Force Service Pilots. The teachers, the male teachers at those schools wanted the WASP's jobs because they were civilians, they would be subject to the draft, and they did not want to become part of what everyone thought was going to be a huge invasion force going to Japan. So they started a campaign against the WASP, a disinformation campaign. They said terrible things about the WASP. They told untrue things about the WASP. And unfortunately, their campaign worked. In December 1944, the Army shut down the WASP program. And it would be nearly 30 years before women were allowed to fly for the military again or to fly even for the airlines. This unfortunate episode in our history has been corrected somewhat. In 1977, a bill was passed that gave the WASP military status. It said that what they had done had indeed been military in nature. And Senator Barry Goldwater was one of the spearheaded the effort to get that bill passed, and he's surrounded by a lot of very grateful WASP. And in 2010, an even more impressive award came to them, the Congressional Gold Medal. And there is Elaine Harmon, standing just to the left of President Obama there, and Lorraine Rogers also. They're making sure that we stand trying to build correctly to get them the medal. And the ceremony where they got the medal was very impressive. It brought together Democrats and Republicans to finally agree on something. These women deserved that award. There's Elaine Harmon with her award, and there were festivities for the whole week, including book signings for Amy's book and my book at the Air and Space Museum. And I just want to close by giving you a quote of one of the quotes that's etched into the windows at the Women's Memorial. This is by Major in the WAC, and I think it sums up women's attitudes for why they served in the war. It isn't just my brother's country, said Miss Major, or my husband's country. It's my country as well. And so the war wasn't just their war. It was my war, and I needed to serve in it. But I want one more quote, and I'm done. This came from Colonel Mary Halloran, who was barely 5 feet tall, and by the end of the war, she commanded all of the WAC serving in Europe. And when asked by someone when she signed up, what can you possibly do to help the military, she said, you don't have to be 6 foot male to have a brain and know how to use it.
It is my pleasure to introduce Amy Goodpaster Street, author, who lives outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. Arlington. It was one of those 8 places. Okay, Amy, would you like to tell us a little about your book?
Yeah, sure. I wish I had a snazzy little PowerPoint presentation to give you today. But basically, I also wanted to say how appreciative I am to be here today. It's such a joy whenever I can spend time with the women veterans and also their supporters, of course. You know, it's sad we're losing our World War II veterans really quickly, and for the last decade, I've been honored to kind of be a part of their world and become friends with them. I started my journey with the WASP actually when I was in graduate school at San Jose State University in the Bay Area. I was working towards my master's in history, and when it came time for me to look for a subject for my master's thesis, I had taken a lot of women's history courses, and I was really interested in women's history. And I remember, strangely enough, I got interested in it more on the Soviet side before I made my way to the American side. But one of my professors had kind of a list of topics that might be of interest to do for a research paper, and one of them was the Soviet women combat pilots of World War II. And I, like most people, thought, oh my gosh, I didn't know women flew during the war, and I need to find out more about this. So the research paper turned into a master's thesis, and what I decided to do, which hadn't been done before, is compare the Soviet women who obviously flew combat during World War II with the WASP, who were America's first, as we all know, women military pilots, and basically do a comparative study. And initially, when I started the project, I thought, am I comparing apples with oranges? You know, the only thing that they have in common was that they were women and they were pilots. But the more I went on in my research, I realized that there are a lot of things that they shared in common. Obviously, there are a lot of things they didn't share. Obviously, political ideologies, the countries that they were come from. They obviously were fighting on the same side as we were during World War II. But there were a lot of different things, obviously, from being part of the Soviet Union. But I decided to kind of look at both things, and I was really honored over the years through my research to meet. Obviously, a lot of the WASP who I interviewed for my thesis and later my book. And then also I went to Moscow and was able to meet several of the Russian women pilots who I read about in my book. And that was a great thrill as well. So it's been a really wonderful thing. I actually serve on the board of directors for the National WASP World War II Museum, which is in Sweetwater, Texas, which is where Avenger Field is, where the WASP trained during the war. So that's a really wonderful thing to be. We're actually in the midst of trying to raise money to renovate the museum, which is essentially a hangar that we want to expand so that we can bring on a lot of archival materials and a lot more things that pertain to the WASP and telling their story. So that's one thing that we're working on right now. And but in terms of, Amy did an excellent job of talking about how the women were utilized in World War II, especially the WASP. So I won't really go into that, but just to give you a little background on the Soviet era women, there are a lot of parallels. We talked about Jacqueline Cochran, obviously, who is the director of the WASP program. Marina Raskova was the director who started she had 3 women regiments, air regiments during World War II in the Soviet Union, and she was able to convince Stalin to utilize women in the war, just as, I guess, Eleanor Roosevelt and Jackie Cochran were able to convince President Roosevelt that women needed to be utilized in the war. And with Marina Raskova, the three air regiments, which was basically a dive bomber regiment, a night bomber regiment. The women pilots from the night regiment would be gone to be called the Night Witches. They'd be called the Night Witches. They flew in World War I era biplanes. You can imagine being up in a World War II biplane canvas up against the Luftwaffe. Can't even imagine that. I've met several of the women who did, though, and I have unlimited respect and admiration for them. And then there was also the fighter squadron, too. They had a fighter squadron, a dive bomber regiment, and then the night bombers as well. So it was a really neat thing. Strangely enough, another parallel between the WASP and the Soviet women is there was only about 1,000 women on both sides, a little over 1,000 WASP, and a little over 1,000 of the Soviet air women who were in the 3 regiments of Marina Raskova. Also, there were also Soviet women who flew in male regiments as well. And there really wasn't any difference between women who flew during the war in the Soviet Union and the men. Whereas obviously there was a difference in America where they were not allowed to fly overseas in a combat. But the Soviet women, they actually did everything that the men did. There really wasn't anything different. Even the flight suits were the same, the equipment was the same, they flew the same planes. There was nothing that really made them different, I guess. Of course, the one thing that prevailed, as with the WASP in America, was that the Soviet, the people, even though they were supportive on one end, the men were supportive of the women flying combat during the war. It was really deemed more of a necessity. And after the war ended, of course, women were basically said, okay, go back to raising your children, rebuilding the Soviet Union. You don't belong in the military, and that was pretty much it. So, and really, women have not gone back into the military in the Soviet Union or Russia now in a combat situation even now. So there are some differences. So anyways, I know our time is limited. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but my book is available for sale after the program. So I urge you, if you're interested in learning about the Soviet Air Women and also, of course, the WASP as well, I'd be happy to sign copies for you. So once again, thank you so much for letting me come here today and share this special day with all of you. And I guess hopefully we'll meet many of you later on. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to introduce Penny Coleman, who earned her Master of Arts degree at Johns Hopkins University.
And I'm in Baltimore, so you pronounced it correct. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to take a moment because one of the things I did is I had an opportunity before the program started to talk to Susan and Edith and Diane, right, and Scotty. And one of my questions was, did they talk about their service when they were growing up? And to a woman, they said, no. So with all the relatives who never knew these stories when you were growing up, who are here, and Susan said that she was thrilled because this event has brought her family together, right? So with all the relatives, raise your hand so we can applaud you for coming here. You truly are the descendants of heroes. So honor your legacy and don't let another generation of people in this country grow up ignorant of any woman's contribution or service to this country. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And those of you who are teachers, shame on you if you're not telling these stories, not just in March, because it's our obligation as somebody who's been writing about women's history and why I took on this, basically a mission, because I've written, I think I'm up to my 16th book now about various women, is because I grew up as a history major and never knew these stories. There was a void, and these stories matter, because how we know who we are in the world is by how we know what we've come from, right? Right. Yes, and so what happens when we don't know that in the most simple terms is what happens is one more generation, like this wonderful girl or my 8-year-old granddaughter, grows up vulnerable to being duped into thinking they have to prove themselves again. And we don't want that. Okay. So I'm the author of Rosie the Riveter, Where the Action Is in World War II. And one of the fun things I got to do in writing this book was actually interview Mary Doyle Keefe, who was the author. And it was fun because she asked me to autograph a book for her, and I said, well, I'll only autograph a book for you if you autograph one for me. So I have an autograph of my own book by the cover, the cover thing. And what was fun about this is because Mary Doyle told me that first Norman Rockwell had given her saddle shoes. You didn't go to work in saddle shoes, did you? No. Did anybody go to work? No. So he was.
We had steel toe shoes.
Exactly. But so he originally had, and even these are loafers. I thought, no. But that's okay. He was an artist. Okay. And then the other thing about this. And you were a riveter? Were you a riveter?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you're all riveters. All right. So all of you would have, if Norman Rockwell had consulted with you, he would not have made the mistake on the cover, which he acknowledged later, is he put both goggles and an isinglass shield. And did any of you ever wear two protective? No. So you'll see if you look closely that there's the isinglass shield that's, on their head, and then
we didn't even know that existed.
And the thing is,
you know who wore that extra helmet type? Were the
welders.
Welders. It wasn't plastic.
Right, it wasn't plastic. I know. There were a number of mistakes, but it's okay because Mary Doyle.
But he's an artist, so we're giving the.
Well, he also did an interview shortly after this cover came out, admitting to his errors. And he also said that he really should not only apologize for those errors, but also apologize to his model, who really is a very beautiful woman and doesn't have those kinds of muscles. Although Mary told me she wouldn't have minded having those kinds of muscles. So that was the fun thing about writing. And I have to tell you, just to tell you a thing is the person who taught me how you all riveted, because I need to write about this, I needed to know, was a riveter named Jan Berenstain. Although that wasn't her name at the time. Her name was Janice Grant. You got it. So Janice Grant was a riveter. Okay. So shout out. Who did she grow up to be?
Berenstain Bears.
Exactly. And yeah, very good.
I've read it too much.
You read it right. Okay. Everybody's read the Berenstain Bear books. Okay. So Janice Grant totally attributed her success as an artist and producing those that endless series of Berenstain Bear books to her experience, the discipline.
Is that from the mic?
I don't know. So that's it. And then my other book is another little known story, which fascinated me, is the story of women war correspondents in World War II. And the women I particularly focused on were the women, and I know this group will really appreciate this group of women. They defy the military regulations. They're the ones who managed to get accredited, but of course were then told, you can't cover combat, it's too dangerous for a woman. Like, the pilots, it was too dangerous for them to fly in combat, but they could have novice gun shooting at them. Or they could train pilots, but, right. We know the schema here, right? And so this was a group of women, and I focused on 18 who actually covered the action, who, like Margaret Bourke-White, Martha Gellhorn, Lee Miller, actually Marguerite Higgins, who died, contracted a tropical disease when she was covering Vietnam and is buried actually in Arlington, actually got to Dachau and then liberated the southern part of the camp before the American troops got there, because she was in a Jeep with an Army sergeant, and they drove in and the German guards started throwing their pistols into the back of the Jeep and surrendered to her, and so they drove out. I write about that in my book. And Lee Miller was a photographer for Vogue, and it was sort of crazy. Sometimes writing these books are sort of crazy making, because I go into the archives and I look at the material and I say, how could this be? Like the spring issue of Vogue magazine of 1945. Okay, are you with me? Okay, so come with me into an archive. Okay, and the librarian hands you that actual magazine. Okay, is everybody with me? Okay, now we've just gone through this war, right? Horrors, we know what's going on. The whole issue is full of fashion, the latest fashion from Paris. In the middle, however, is Lee Miller's article saying, believe it, you must, with her pictures from Buchenwald. It's a really, really powerful, again, I write about that in my book. But for me, it was so, because I was born actually on September 2nd, 1944. So that's the first anniversary of the Japanese surrender on the battleship Missouri. And it was just sort of an amazing thing for me to understand what it is about how wars keep happening, how we don't really learn stuff, you know, embedded in all the latest fashions from Paris are these horrific pictures of this incredible, you know, this unbelievable atrocity. So there's a lot to learn, which is again why we need to tell these stories. So by the time World War II ended, America's wartime production record included almost 300,000 airplanes, over 100,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 88,000 warships, 370,000 artillery pieces, 47 million tons of artillery ammunition, and 44 billion rounds of small arms ammunition. Time magazine called America's war production a miracle. This miracle would not have happened without you all, without all the women who went to work in these factories, took dangerous jobs. There was a report published by the Labor Department, which again I report in my book, in the New York Times, where there were greater numbers of industrial accidents and fatalities on the home front than on the battlefield. It's astonishing, isn't it? Astonishing. And if you look on the back of the handout, you'll see two of the women I talk about, because this miracle would not have happened without women war workers, including Norma Cutting, who's right there in the middle. See her? The crane operator, who operated 60 feet above the cement floor of the steel factory. And next to her, does anybody know who's to the left? Who's to the left of Norma Cutting? No, sorry, to the right. Who's to the right of Norma Cutting?
Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe. What was her name at the time? Yes, and she worked she's working in a dope room at a factory called Radioplane in California, Radioplane, where liquid plastic and dope was sprayed. And she was such a proficient worker that she won several Navy E's for excellent for her service, and was hard at work when a military photographer came through, and initially she refused to have her picture taken because she didn't want to slow down her production. But her boss, a guy on the line, of course told her she had to. And of course that's one of those photographs, and we all know what the result of that was. And then in addition, millions more women performed what was called essential civilian jobs, jobs that kept the home front running smoothly. You can see them there. Police officers, loggers, taxi drivers, baseball players, pharmacists, chemists. The woman in the white coat on the sort of the left-hand side of the page, her name was Louise Ackerman, and she was a young chemist in Pittsburgh. And she invented a glue that was strong enough, literally, to hold up a locomotive. Now, how was her exploits reported in the press? Was it that she was a brilliant scientist? Was the chemical da-da-da-da, was that how it was reported in the press? No. It was about how she had done in the laboratory what any woman can do in her kitchen. It was all the culinary connection. So as I was reading this, doing my research, because of course I grew up when there was this cultural amnesia, and I talked to Edith, and I loved Edith's comment when she was talking about this event, and you said, you know, it's about time, and we all agree with that. And if you can turn over on the back, you can see the latest addition to honoring you all. The right-hand photograph at the top is, of course, was dedicated in 2000. Which is the Rosie the Riveter Memorial, the National Park in Richmond, California. And that's an artist's depiction of a Liberty ship, and the length from the lower part where there's that structure to the end is the length of a Liberty Street, and it's full of archival quotes and photographs. There's also General Voigt's made just a huge contribution of the Women in Memorial in Arlington that was dedicated in 2006? 1997. Oh, wow, sorry, I got my dates mixed up. And the latest, which was just dedicated to the left, 15 minutes from my house in New Jersey, is a Rosie the Riveter statue that was dedicated on June 19th of this year on the grounds of a former Curtiss Wright airplane factory. And there it is, a 6-foot bronze statue that's part of an industrial park. So yes, it's been long overdue, but here we are with this marvelous celebration put together by the wonderful co-chairs of this event, and in this marvelous space of the Women's Heritage Society. You all should be so proud that Maryland has this, and the people who have fought to get this. So when the war ended, of course, we all know what happened. These extraordinary job opportunities for women abruptly disappeared. According to William McCahey, who supervised women war workers at a factory in Camden, New Jersey, quote, "I'll never forget the day after the war ended. We met the girls at the door and we handed them a slip to go over to personnel and get their severance pay. We didn't even allow them in the building, all these women with whom I had become so close, who had worked 7 days a week for years and had been commended so many times by the Navy for the work they were doing." Although America no longer needed women war workers, women in civilian jobs, women in civil defense, women in the Red Cross during the large numbers, women as plane spotters, women recycling, women gathering. There was a group in New York that in 1 week collected a mile-long length of nylon stockings to be used during the war. I mean, women's contributions go all the way through every aspect of life in an individual's life and in the country's life during this time. And as I immersed myself in this story, bouncing between, why didn't I know any of this? I majored in history. What happened to this story? I was just enthralled with the story of women stepping up, you know, and African American women, despite enormous prejudice. African American women were typically given jobs in like explosive factories, you know, way out in the boondocks of like Georgia, because they were told that African Americans' fingertips, specifically women, African Americans' fingertips were more sensitive to explosives. Well, we all know what that meant. It meant if they're expendable, they can get blown up because these factories would blow up. There were racial incidents in Baltimore, in Detroit, but African American women continued, you know, to come back. There's records of Native American women in Seattle who worked. Again, there's a picture in my book. So, you know, there are some women with disabilities. Roosevelt kept an eye on that. I've written a biography of Frances Perkins during this time. Frances Perkins, who was Secretary of Labor. People with disabilities, again, there's a picture in my book. Actually, blind women, in fact, regardless of race, that do have more sensitive fingertips. So they were given very sensitive jobs that required feel. So, you know, there's just so many different aspects to talk about this whole story. But when the war ends, we're told, or we were told, or I was told, or anybody knows anything about this period, and they were kind of how it's explained about what happened to these jobs for women. What did we get told? Because they wanted, yeah, right, exactly. Camille, yes, they went home because they wanted to, because they were tired, because it really wasn't women's work. Well, some women were ready to quit. Lorraine Bloom, a riveter in a Boeing plant, was quoted in a company newsletter as saying, "As soon as it's curtains for the access, it's going to be lace curtains for me. I want to establish my own home and stay put." But many women did mind losing their jobs. In Highland Park, Michigan, 200 women who had been laid off at the Ford plant conducted a protest. Marching in front of the plant, women carried signs that read, "Stop discrimination because of sex. How come no work for women?" When Ophelia Juliet Goddess, who had worked at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation for the duration of the war, was laid off, she wrote to President Roosevelt, quote, "I happen to be a widow with a mother and a son to support. I would like to know why, after serving a company in good faith for almost 3.5 years, it's now impossible to obtain employment with them. I'm a lathe hand and was classified as a skilled laborer, but simply because I happen to be a woman, I'm not wanted." As women lived their lives after World War II, many women war workers did not talk about their experience. For some women, it was too painful to remember how quickly their careers as welders, riveters, and crane operators had ended. Other women were working hard to survive, did not have time to reminisce. Many women felt that people were not interested in their stories, especially in the 1950s when there was an escalating trend towards blaming working women for problems ranging from, let me see, autism, juvenile delinquency, divorce. Remember, women all got the blame. There was even a term of schizophrenic mother. You all remember that blame that was heaped on? But women war workers, I discovered in my research, never forgot the experience they had for the duration of World War II. They never forgot the thrill of getting a chance, tell me if I'm wrong, of doing a job, of getting a job and doing it. They never forgot the satisfaction of earning good wages. With me?
Even though it's smaller.
Even though it was smaller, it was a little more than
what we had.
Exactly. They never forgot the excitement of being independent, but they never forgot that once a time in their lifetime, there was a time in America where women were told they can do anything, and they did it. Thank you.
We'd like to thank all of our authors today for sharing their expertise, and just a reminder, they will be in the lobby area signing their books afterwards. I'd like to introduce someone who's with us today, who's from Maryland, and she has a special story. Greta Zimmer Friedman was born in Austria and came to New York City in 1939, escaping the Nazi Holocaust. She volunteered as an air raid warden on her aunt's street and later worked as a dental assistant. On August 14, 1945, Greta took her lunch break and walked to Times Square, where she found everyone celebrating the end of World War II. A sailor passed by, grabbed her, and kissed her. Life photographer Alfred Eisenstadt snapped her picture, and the rest is history.
Our next speaker is Brigadier General William L. Vaught. She's a U.S. Air Force retired Brigadier General. She's president of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation, and you need to know about this place, so I'm so happy that she's here.
On behalf of the Women's Memorial, I bring you greetings from all of the women, past and present, who served our country, to whom that memorial pays tribute. And that's probably in the neighborhood of between 2.5 million and 3 million women at this point. And so we just have a very small sampling of those women here. Now, it happens that today you have a significant opportunity here. You know, I get credit a lot for having had this idea of building a memorial honoring all the women. This is not true, because I didn't have this idea. But one of the people, there were 3 or 4 people who had the idea at about that time, but one woman here today was the one who started this and worked to do the lobbying, to get the legislation passed, authorizing the memorial to be built in Washington, D.C., and that woman is June Williams. She is the woman, she came up with the American Veterans Committee with the idea of having that memorial, only she called it the Women's War Memorial. And you know, we're not in favor of war, we're for peace. So we didn't have that. And this October 19th and 20th, we will be celebrating the 15th anniversary of the dedication of the memorial. And it will begin on the evening of the 19th with a gala dinner, and we do have seats available if somebody wants to pay the price and come. And then on Saturday, the 20th of October at 2 o'clock, we will have the formal ceremony for the 15th anniversary, and I don't know if they'll be able to be in the country to be there, the great traveler, Defense Secretary Panetta, but that's who's invited. I don't know if they'll be able to make it or not. And then that evening at 6 o'clock will be the candlelight march from the Lincoln Memorial down to the memorial for the service of remembrance. So if you can come to that, that's all free. We'll have a free candle for you. And hopefully it will have a battery in it so it will light, and you can be a participant in that. We do oral histories. We've done about 1,500 now. So if any of you would like to do that, we would be happy to make arrangements to do that, any of you who are military women. And we've had, since the memorial opened in 1997, October the 18th, we have had 2.5 million visitors, at least, who have come through there. And one of the things I'm very proud of is that we have many, both men and women, who come there for their promotion ceremony or their retirement ceremony. And then many people come there for a reception after a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. So we do that for people. And I was very thrilled here recently when an Army man, soldier, chose to have his promotion ceremony there to the 4th star, full general. And I thought that was a tremendous compliment to the Women's Memorial that a man wanted to come there and have his promotion to general there. So I could have gone, and I didn't go because I want to go to the ceremony for a woman being promoted to the 4th star. As I hope all of you know, we have had that first woman 4-star, General Ann Dunwoody, who was in the Army. She retired August the 15th, and just before that took place, I think it was the 7th of June, the Air Force promoted Janet Wolfenbarger to the 4-star, and she's the commander of Air Material Command out at Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio. So we have an Air Force 4-star on duty today, and she will be the speaker at the dinner of the 15th anniversary. So there are lots of other things I could tell you, but we've been here for some time, and I will quit at that, except I'm trying to get 200 to 250,000 women registered. We're within 600 now. So if you're not if you're here and you serve the military and you're not registered, I hope you'll register and do it quickly so I can get it in there before our program on the 19th and 20th. And I know that these WASP are registered, and I've seen several others of you here that I know are registered, so I hope that all of you will be registered so that your name, your picture, your record of service, your memorable experience go in that memorial for all time.
Wow.
This is your legacy. It's your memorial. And take advantage of it. Make it yours. Thank you very much.
We received a couple letters from local public servants who want to make sure that the people that are being honored today hear their voice. This comes from the House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Dear friends, I am writing to extend greetings to Baltimore's Maryland Women's Heritage Center on the occasion of your honoring World War II's Unsung Heroines, and to the honorees and guests in attendance. Congratulations and a heartfelt thanks to you, the women who served in the military, and to the women who were war workers during World War II. You saw the need and you helped the war effort abroad and on the home front. I applaud your personal sacrifices and hard work to support our nation in the time of war. You answered the call and took up the challenge to do all that you could in the fight for freedom. You played a vital role for our success. Expressions of our collective gratitude are long overdue. I commend the Maryland Women's Heritage Center in Baltimore for recognizing the dedication and accomplishments of these brave and outstanding women. Congratulations to all of the women who served during World War II and to their families and friends. Thank you to the Rosie the Riveters who worked at Glen L. Martin during World War II, and to the National Association of Black Military Women for telling and preserving her story and for what you continue to do for our African American military women. I remember with gratitude and pride the inspiring and selfless service of Major Charity Adams Early, the first African American WAC. She died at the age of 83 in 2002 after a lifetime of exemplary contributions to society. We have her book here. Best wishes to everyone for an informative and memorable event. Sincerely, Elijah E. Cummins, member of the Congress. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Dear friends, it is my greatest pleasure to welcome all those gathered today for the World War II Unsung Heroines program hosted by the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. I would also like to acknowledge all of today's honorees. The Maryland Women's Heritage Center has for decades recognized hundreds of worthy women for relentless service to our nation. As we join MWHC to celebrate these heroines, we honor them as courageous symbols of strength and triumph during a period of world chaos and devastation. We are now in a new phase of history with much to celebrate, and yet still much work to do. However, we recognize the many sacrifices of women from a generation past who continue to commendably serve their families, communities, and the great state of Maryland. I am proud of today's honorees and thank them for their important work protecting and expanding the freedom we enjoy as Americans. I congratulate the superb efforts of MWHC and I wish everyone a joyous celebration. Please accept my best wishes for a wonderful event. Sincerely, John P. Sarbanes, Member of Congress.
Alice Podolsky, Rose King, Grace Henninger.
Just
Slow down.
give us a chance.
What's Alice's last name?
Alice is right with us here. Alice is the Rosie from Glen L. Martin.
Grace Henninger. Rose Yingling. Loretta Simon. Eleanor Mayblum, Rosie. Mahoney.
Okay, just hold on. We have
I'm sorry, I missed that one. Violet Johnson, Rosie.
honors right here. This is the wrong one. That's okay. You're great ahead of her. Eleanor, you better.
Diane Sumner, Graves. Edith Esslinger, Army nurse. Betty Sims, Marine. Susan King, Rosen. Elaine Harmon, Ruth Ledbetter, Rosie.
And we have a representative. Good job.
Jordan. To Melissa Jordan.
And Mary Esselin, she have a family member, Rosie. Again, thank you all. Thank you for allowing Senator McCarthy to share this important moment with you in this moment in history. God bless you all.
This is a proud moment for us at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. You are the shoulders that we have grown up from. You are our foremothers that have made all the difference for what girls and women today can do, and for the respect that boys and men have for girls and women. And we thank you very much for all that you have served for our country. And we're so happy that the Maryland Women's Heritage Center could be part of honoring you at last in this way.
The conclusion.
We just want to thank you so much for joining us today to fulfill our goal of recognizing, honoring, and appreciating the women during the World War II era who served in the service and on the home front. Let's just thank them.
We hope you enjoyed the show today. Until next time, God bless.